The question of ensuring that rights and competent Nigerians are nominated to negotiate treaties and agreements. First, I think the most important thing really is first to identify what is important to us as a nation and to ensure that that is clear down the line. Because one of the crucial issues that we have to contend with is that very frequently, not enough attention is paid to what is really important. And that's not to say that government isn't going on, but just not enough attention is paid to what exactly is it that is important to us at this time. For example, I was talking about WTO negotiations, World Trade Organization negotiations, and the various rounds of trade talks that have been going on. We know that if government shows an interest, if government, for example, says that we must ensure that negotiations around these talks are robust and that they are seriously done, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Justice, and relevant ministries will respond. We have good and competent individuals, and we also hire consultants on a regular basis whenever something of importance arises. So for me, I think the most important thing is government paying attention to those issues and directing the minds of appropriate officers and ministries to what is important to us. And that's one of the things that this government has undertaken to do, to define very clearly to the civil service those issues that are of primary importance to us. Yesterday at the Federal Executive Council, we were considering a treaty which has to do with cyberspace and cybercrime, and of course, a lot of what happened, the discussions around the table, showed clarity as to what is important to us and what is not important, and what issues are important. And that's the approach that the government will take going forward, that we define very clearly. Trade is absolutely important to us. We're not going to leave world trade negotiations to just anybody. Where we need to hire experts, we'll hire the experts. Where we need to deal with other countries and negotiate with other countries, we'll do so. For example, if you notice, the president, almost in the past few months, has practically gone around all of the ECOWAS countries and then the Lake Chad Basin countries as well, partly for security issues and also partly for economic issues. We've got to establish those relationships with our partners and with our neighbors. At each of those meetings, including the G7 meetings and all of that, our economic objectives are clearly laid out, and we make our case very clearly as to what we want to do. In some cases, we have to renegotiate agreements, and we have to renegotiate positions that were taken because our objectives are very clear. So I think really, once government sends the right signals, invariably we will pick the right individuals to negotiate on our behalf. The existing legal framework, whether it is strong enough to prosecute offenders, especially financial offenders, in a timely manner. First, let me say that the framework itself is sufficient and it's adequate. The framework is adequate. It's not really the problem. In other words, we have the right structures, but we have significant problems in the operation of those structures. We have significant problems. For example, we need to be able to deliver on cases quickly. In other words, a case is filed today. We need to be able to say precisely when that case will end. But there are very many ways by which, at the moment, those who want to delay trials can do so. Some of those problems are constitutional. For example, our constitution allows appeals, even with respect to interlocutory issues. So for example, a person can come to court, a person charged with an offense, comes to court and says that the very charge that he's expected to plead to is defective in some way. And for that reason, he wants the charge quashed. And then a whole process begins, and all of that, and we're wasting a lot of time. So dilatory tactics by counsel, in very many cases, can lead to protraction of cases. But we have also tried, in terms of judicial policy and in terms of legislation, to curtail that. For example, under the Administration of Justice Act, today the provisions are that you cannot stay proceedings in a criminal trial merely because you are appealing on an interlocutory point. So there are now some provisions that attempt to curtail that. Of course, there are also other dilatory tactics that are employed to keep cases running. But again, we think that the judiciary can do a lot more in terms of just taking charge of cases and ensuring that they respond to cases, especially important cases such as cases involving financial misappropriation and cases that threaten national security and all of those kinds of things. I think that the judiciary must respond more robustly, especially in terms of ensuring that it keeps control of the courts, does not allow frivolous adjournments, and ensures that rulings are delivered in a timely fashion, and that the overall judicial policy of speed in the dispensation of justice is maintained, and that is the right approach. The other thing, of course, is corruption. Corruption within the legal system. That's a problem that we've had to contend with and that we must deal with. Just as we have corruption in several other sectors of our national life, there is a fair amount of corruption in the legal system. And I think that corruption is also a factor. It's a factor, and we must deal with the issues, with those issues as well. And I think in dealing with those issues of corruption, especially judicial corruption, there's an example that we have, and we can use some of the better examples that we have in the States and in other countries. In Lagos State, in 1999, when the Timbuktoo administration came in 1999, we did a survey of the courts, the high courts of Lagos State. We asked 100 lawyers who practiced regularly in the courts what their perception was of judicial integrity. We asked the question, what's your perception of integrity of judges? And 89% said that they thought judges in the state were notoriously corrupt. Notoriously corrupt. And as of 1999, despite the fact that the verdict of 100, well, I mean, if you like, statistically, a high, very, very high percentage of practitioners was that judges were notoriously corrupt. No single judge or magistrate had ever been indicted for corruption as of that time in the state. So we discovered that obviously there was something wrong and that we had to deal with the problem. Now, how did we deal with the problem? We sat around with the judges. I, as Attorney General, sat with the judges. We had, heart-to-heart meeting of senior judges. First thing we considered was, what's the remuneration of judges? At the time, judges were being paid, I think, 67,000 naira or so. And that was all. So we decided, let's look at this 67,000 naira that you're earning. How do you pay children's school fees in a private school? One child is abroad. How do you pay that? And as we began to do the calculation, one of the senior judges stopped me and said, Attorney General, I think you should stop this. Let's stop this nonsense. You and I know that this thing is not possible. So we suddenly realized, even if we didn't know before, that as we pretended to pay, they also pretended to work. So there was we knew that the pay was certainly not commensurate to the work they were doing, or enough to discourage malfeasance in the way that we saw it. Although personally, I don't believe that that there's a necessary correlation all the time, but that's another argument. So we decided that we had to deal with remuneration, and we had a whole raft of issues around remuneration of judges. We decided that one of the chief problems that judges have is the fear that when they retire, they will not have a home to retire to. In other words, once a judge retires, he's left on his own. He can't practice law anymore because, as you know, judges cannot appear in courts after they retire. So essentially, they are hampered and they are almost, disabled from practicing their profession. So they can actually die very, very poor indeed. And so we decided that every judge must have a house of his own permanently. The moment you become a judge, we'll give you a house in Ikoyi, Lekki, or Ikeja GRA. It's yours for life. We also give facilities. We give you all sorts of other facilities, of course, car allowance, travel allowance, medicals, and all of those kinds of facilities. When we improved remuneration, we also took a look at a very important issue, which is discipline. If a report is made, you will face the consequences if you are found responsible. To cut a long story short, by 2002, 22 magistrates in the state had lost their jobs, and 3 judges had also lost their jobs. Now, it was clear to everyone that there would be consequence for any kind of misbehavior. By 2007, we did that same survey. Again, this time we were assisted by the World Bank. In that survey, 0% of lawyers now said that judges in the High Court of Lagos State were corrupt, 0%, from 89%. Now what happened? Was it that their lordships and ladyships became born again? No, it wasn't. That's not what happened. What happened was, first, we considered the issue of their remuneration, and secondly, we ensured that everyone realized that there will be a consequence for misbehavior. Once it is clear to all that there will be consequence, and that consequence will be pursued regardless of who you are or where you're coming from, it will change, it will modify behavior considerably. And I think that that's, some of what we absolutely need to do to ensure that our judiciary, our entire legal system, responds positively to the demands of today and responds positively to the business of doing justice fair. Thank you.